Good morning and welcome back to another episode of The Extra Point here on ESPN Denver 1600. I'm your host, Roland Rainey, and as always, I'm joined with Jeremy Coleman from Indiana, Justice Gordon from New York, and Robert Parker from New Jersey. And I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, we have a special one for you today because today's episode, we have for you a legendary ESPN analyst, a former Pittsburgh Steelers running back and Chicago Bear running back, and a motivational speaker who is traveling all across, spreading the word of find a way. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you on today's episode, Merrill Hodge. Welcome, Merrill, to The Extra Point. How are we doing today?
Well, we're great. I hope I can live up to that introduction, man. There's some energy in it. I love it.
Hey, energy is what we're all about here at The Extra Point.
Absolutely.
Once again, thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule to join us. And I tell you, we won't waste any time. We're going to go ahead and jump right in. So we're going to go ahead and kick this off with Robert Parker out of New Jersey. Go ahead, Robert.
How's it going, Merrill? Just like Roland said, thanks for coming on to the show. But I'm an X's and O's guy, so I would just like to dive in. So in the last couple of years, there's been a narrative surrounding the running back position as far as it being devalued. Because, seeing Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, and Derrick Henry and those guys kind of run the ball, it's really seemed like they're leading their team and kind of winning great football. So what is your take on that running back position being devalued?
Well, it's always interesting. The people who say it's devalued have never played it and never coached it, And what was interesting to me is that when a guy like Adrian Peterson comes around, or Saquon Barkley, do they go to the second round? Do they go to the third round because they're not valued? No, they go in the first round. Why? Because they're unique talents and they can do significant damage and to end the National Football League. The running game, I think, is something that's so misunderstood. And you hear people say, and when I hear people say it's a passing game, okay, wait a time out. The passing game has expanded. There's no doubt about that. There's all kinds of facets and phases to the passing game. But the running game didn't go away. If you want to look at the history of championships and Super Bowls, that component is a critical component and a critical phase to your offense. In fact, teams that lack that, you go back to last year on, say, the 5 leading rushing teams in all of football were in the playoffs. The 5 leading passing, or four of the 5 leading passing teams in football weren't in the playoffs. So if you're all about numbers and you want to look at that, numbers don't even answer that equation. Answers don't. Numbers like that don't even support you. And quite honestly, the only thing that matters in football as far as statistics go is really turnovers. They don't understand the true NFL then when they say that. The running game is a critical component. When a special runner comes around, he's going to be taken in the first round. Can you find other running backs in other rounds? Sure, you can do that at every position, though. It's not just the running backs. So people that say that to me, I always try to quiz them on, okay, what's that stemmed from? Are you just saying it to say it because other people have said it? They're the same people that say, the running game has become this league has become a two-back league. It's always been a two-back league. If you want to know the history of it, and if you're really going to say that, you can't be incompetent to say that. You got to have evidence behind it. There's only one thing that's changed over some 100 years since we've been playing this game at 50 in the National Football League. And it started in around the late 80s, early 90s, the formation. The game in the National Football League went from split backs to an I-back. Well, when you played in split backs, and you go back and look at the history from the Steelers, the Miami Dolphins, even the San Francisco 49ers, Dallas Cowboys, in those eras, there was a predominant runner. Here's the Pittsburgh Steelers, for example. That was Franco Harris. But Rocky Bleier carried it 12 or 15 times, depending on every game. They just split those carries up. Now, when you went to the I formation, you can't hand it to a guy 40 times. He's not going to last 16 games. So, yeah, you have to sub him in. And, yeah, you have a third down guy who comes in on occasion. So, when people say that, it's the wrong comment. It's always been a two-back league. The only thing that changed was the formation. The running game is one of the most vital components to winning championships and being successful. Go to every Sunday. What do you always hear the analysts talk about? What did the defensive coordinator say? Nobody says you got to start the pass. game, a la what the Chiefs do, and really what the Steelers are evolving into. And you think of some complete offenses. Why? Because it's a burden on your defense. It's hard to win when they can do a bunch of things to beat you. One of the problems with the Ravens is their running game is dynamic. It is one of the most dynamic in all of football, and it's balanced and it's complete. Where do they really start running into phase issues? In their passing game. They're very limited in their passing game. It's a run-action passing game. They can't line up and spread you out and move the ball up and down the field, throwing the football. It's just not one of their strengths. So people who say that, I'm like, well, the next time Saquon Barkley comes around, we'll see if he goes in the second or third round, because players like that don't. Great talents like that don't, because they make a significant impact on a team and could be game changers, and championships are built around people like that.
The question I have for you, what could cause CTE other than, football-related concussions? Because I know you definitely argued, against that.
Now, let me first clear something up. I only argued what the actual scientific literature says. Okay, I didn't just come out and say, hey, you know what? Football doesn't cause CTE. I didn't say that. I said the literature actually says that. And that's very important. And when I say scientific literature, when people start to have this discussion or this debate, the first thing they need to be asked, have you read the scientific literature? Now, I got to clarify what scientific literature is. And this comes from the narrative we have discovered that we've been fed from the media. Everybody that I have talked in the media, and I'll just give you one example. A guy was sitting there arguing with me that he has scientific evidence that football causes CT. I said, cause? Like, you have a scientific paper that says it causes. Just so you know, if you have that, you're the only one on the planet. If you want to send it to me, I'm going to shut up. I'm going to take my book off the shelf. You know what he sent me? He sent me a Sports Illustrated article. That tells you the grotesque incompetence of journalists out there. He didn't even know what a scientific journal was. So you have all these journalists writing about stuff that they have no idea what they're writing about. They haven't done their due diligence. They haven't went and read the literature. So what I did is I set out to really find out, what it is. Is football causing it? You just refer to if football's not causing it, what is? There's no evidence that football causes it. There's not one shred of evidence that you could show me that I'll let you dig for an entire year in the scientific literature. You will never be able to pull that information out for me. You will never be able to show me that scientific literature. I've read all the papers, and I read all the papers that continue to go out. So let's go back to the journal. I was just like anybody else that started to hear about it. Let's shoot, Mike Webster was my roommate when I first got in the National Football League. Justin Strelzik, a good teammate of mine. Very long teammate. Junior Seau, good friend of mine. When you hear the media say, this CT caused, first of all, CT has never caused anybody's death. But let's back up one more step. In my journey, I talked to 12 neuropathologists and brain scientists throughout the world. Not just this country, the world. I asked them the same thing every time, and I got the same response every time. My question was simply this: how is football causing CTE? How is this happening? Is it? They're like, well, hold on. First of all, CTE is a pattern in an observation state. There's not enough scientific evidence, research done to this point to even declare it a disease. It's a pattern in an observation state. That's not what they say on the TV. That's not what I read in the paper. They're like, that's the whole problem. You have people saying it's a disease when the scientific literature does not support that. In fact, at that time, and this is like 3 years ago that this started, and I fast forward to this, 3 years ago to this time, 1/3 of the people who had the pattern of CTE never played sports, never had a history of head trauma. They didn't even have a concussion, yet they have that pattern. Well, how do you blame football for that? It's not even a part of their environment. It's not even a part of what their makeup was. And head trauma wasn't even a part of it. I'm like, well, why don't you hear that? Because it doesn't fit the narrative. Now, when you go today, there is more people in the scientific literature that have that pattern never played sports. So you're like, how does the narrative get to that? I'll tell you this. I'm going to give you one piece of evidence, and this is what triggered me to write the book. I'm up in Canada. I'm talking to one of the great minds that I came across, a doctor up in Canada, Lizzie Hazarati. And I'm talking to her about this, and she's gentle, she is wise. But she's like, listen, here's what you need to do. She challenged me. She goes, you need to go read the scientific literature. First paper I took, she said, read the Spectrum of Disease paper, authored by Ann McKee. Okay? I read the scientific literature. Here's the conclusion. I'm paraphrasing here. The methodology in this paper, if you did it in high school, you would be flunked. They would flunk you simply because there was no baseline to compare it to, but yet they draw a conclusion from it, but they get out of it by explaining that in the conclusion, that they basically do this. But paraphrasing, the conclusion says this. After doing all of that research, you can't give anybody, actually, let me back up. The word caution is thrown in there, okay? I'm not making that word up. That word exists in there. Caution must be used in giving anybody any sense or degree of CTE to NFL players or veterans. That's the wording in there. Now, she was asked in the media after doing that research paper that I just told you what she wrote in there, what she said in there, because of the garbage that exists in it. She tells the media, I got to believe after doing that research paper that every football player has it. Well, what do you think went out on the headlines? What do you think people took and put in the headlines in the local news? CTE caused by football. CTE, every football player has it. If you play football, you're going to have CTE. In that paper also, the only thing of truth, it says, now, if you can replicate and duplicate what we're saying in this paper, you might. They actually use the word you might, which is true. You might. Even though you have a bunch of other researchers who try to do it, because if you don't understand science, in order to start getting answers, that's one of the most critical components of science. It's got to be replicated and duplicated. So you make it. You make a paper. You write. You drop a paper. You come to a conclusion. Okay. Well, the rest of us are going to try to see if we can come up with that same conclusion. We're going to use a wider scope. We're going to do a lot of different researchers in different ways to see if we can come up just what you came up with. Now, if we all come up with the opposite of what you come up with, what does that say about your paper? That says your paper is really garbage, that you really have nothing, okay? 9 other scientific institutions tried to do what Ann McKee did on her paper. Every one of them showed the complete opposite. In fact, there was a paper in Wisconsin, okay, that showed that people in the band and theater had more cognitive issues later in life than did athletes and people who competed in contact sports. Did you hear that in the news? Absolutely not.
Definitely not.
So when you start reading the facts, and then start not just throw some common sense. I mean, how many people who've played contact sports over an archaic state environment where our instruction was horrible, our equipment was paper mache to what we have today, and we did nothing about head trauma. Now let's say of those 3 things, the only thing that changes is we start doing something about head trauma. Right there, we've made sports a better environment and a safer environment, because we're addressing an injury that a lot of people didn't even know how. I mean, nobody knew how to handle this for a long period of time. That's a whole other discussion that we could have. But the protocols that exist today, the equipment, the instruction, the way the game is played, and the treatments, the care, and how you can recover. I watched my own son go through something very similar to what happened to me 20 years earlier, where they told me I had 2 years to recover. They had him back and ready to go in 10 days because of his cognitive rehab plan and his physical rehab plan. There's so much there that it can be certainly confusing, but here is the fact. Nobody knows what causes that pattern.
Well, hey, it's definitely something, it's pretty clear to us and definitely pretty clear to the audience listening in that this is a topic that you're very passionate about. And rightfully so, because like in any literature, you want to make sure you get it right, especially when you start speaking about scientific studies and results that come about. So, ladies and gentlemen, you are listening into The Extra Point here on ESPN 1600. I'm your host, Roland Rainey, and our special guest today is Merrill Hodge. So we'll keep this going, Merrill, and swing this over to Indiana to Jeremy.
My question has to deal with how did your transition from the field to the broadcasting booth occur? And when did you start to think that was a realistic option for you after your playing career?
Well, I'll be honest there's a lot behind that. I found myself lucky. You guys talked about a mentor. You guys followed, learned from, and I'm sure you probably have more than that. But Chuck Noll was the greatest man that I've ever met. He wasn't the greatest coach. He was the greatest man. He was a tremendous. Yes, he was a tremendous coach, absolutely, but he was a great teacher. He was a great teacher of building young men, building responsible, accountable people. And he used to always use this term, your life's work. And when I'm a rookie, I'm like, what's he talking about, your life's work? I'm going to be doing this forever. So, I don't know what he's talking about, but I plan on doing this for a long period of time. And I played my first NFL game. I'm like, okay, I understand what he's talking about, your life's work. I mean, this is a rough business out there. That being said, it always struck me as like, your life's work, why is he so passionate? 2 times he would make that speech. If we ever got beat bad, he would make that speech because he's like, we all might be doing our life's work a lot sooner than you expect. We keep playing like that. So that would get everybody's attention. And at the end of the year, he used to always give us that counsel. And he's like, if you had schooling to finish that. He said you would have a platform and a stage. He said, use it, don't abuse it. And I thought it was great counsel. And you have a responsibility to do things to get ready for when football is over for you. And so he was always teaching that, always talking about it, always challenging us about that. And I had never heard that before. So I did go back and finish school. And then really the next year, I really got in to doing other things to see what I want to do. And I got done playing. Long story short, but the first time I ever walked into a studio, a broadcast booth, I'd done an agreement with a rock station in Pittsburgh, WDVE. One of their real requirements was that I go to the studio. I didn't call in. Now, and they wanted me to do it on a Monday before I went to practice, which I had to be practiced by 8. So that means I had to be in their studio by 7. And after a Sunday game, that's the last thing I wanted to do is get up that early and go to that studio. But then I started thinking of Chuck's counsel, don't abuse it. I mean, use it, but don't abuse it. And I felt like, well, I'm trying to be a baby here. They're extending this offer. They're paying me to do it. I had to do it. Well, I had never walked into a studio. I walked into that studio, and I'm going to be honest with you, it changed my life. It's like something just grabbed me. I thought it was the coolest environment I'd ever seen. And I became one of the first players, like in the 80s, that had a talk show. I had a show that I did at DVE on Monday and Thursday. And that got me interested. So every time broadcasting crews or crews would come in to get games, I would visit with them, every aspect of it. When I went to Chicago, part of my deal in Chicago was I was the CBS, had a CBS post-game show and pre-game show. And I did a 2-hour Monday night show at Walter Payton's restaurant, which Walter Payton was my hero. So I think this was like, you can't get better. I mean, I was like in heaven. I was like, I'm working on broadcasting. I'm playing for my other favorite team because it was Walter Payton. I'm doing my show at Walter Payton's. And so just I evolved and kept doing those things. And when my career did end, I decided to cast my lines out into 2 areas, coaching and broadcasting. And 2 things hit for me broadcasting right off the bat. The Steelers actually brought me back, and I was their first player ever in the booth to do games for them. Nobody knows that because when I first got there, they wouldn't let me talk. In fact, this was my role, speak when spoken to. And I actually thought that was a great role because we were struggling so bad as the 2 guys that had been there forever didn't want me there. So that was why. I was like, that's beautiful. I don't know when to speak now. And it was very interesting. They hardly ever spoke to me, so that kind of tells you. And I helped launch ESPN2 with ESPN when they did start doing college football. So I started doing that. Those are the things that I got immediately when I finished playing, and then my career just went off into that direction. But I credit a great man and a leader challenging us, and I was just smart enough to listen. I was just wise enough to listen to his counsel and to do my due diligence during my career that allowed me a lot of options and relationships when my career ended. Had I not done that, we wouldn't be talking about broadcasting, I promise you that. If I had not listened to that counsel, had not stumbled across so many people, we would not be talking about my broadcasting career.
You make a great point, and as you mentioned, there's always that special mentor or someone that you look up to that helps motivate you and push you along. Looking at your transition throughout the years, looking at some of the medical issues that you've gone through and you've beaten, you just have that heart, that motivation, that thrive that a lot of people are looking for, which brings me to the point, find a way. What brought you to motivational speaking, and what brought you to that line, find a way?
I'm glad you asked this. I wish I could be with you guys for a couple hours. And let me just mention this. If you ever want me to come back and we talk more about the CTE stuff, there's so much there. I'd love to come back and share it with you. And this is the perfect way to wrap this up, because that's where it all started, Roland. Find a Ways helped me live a dream and fight to live. But it was actually really supposed to help me just live a dream. I think that everybody would identify with this. When you were a kid, you probably were asked, what are you going to do? What do you want to be? And I remember thinking, geez, I don't know what I want to do. I'm age 8, right? So who knows at age 8? But I always think, that's interesting. I want to think about that. Well, I walk in one day and I see a football game on television. I remember it was the Green Bay Packers. Don't remember who else they were playing. And here's what I was like. I was like, I know what I want to do. That's what I'm going to do. Because I've been playing it in the backyard. I had no idea these cats were on television doing it. And, it just grabbed me. So I couldn't wait for the person to ask me. The next person to ask me, I couldn't wait to fire off what I was going to do. As soon as I get asked it and I fire off what I'm going to do, one of 4 things was always said to me right away. Oh, you know how hard that is? Oh, you know the odds of you playing in the NFL? Oh, son, don't put all your eggs in one basket. I wouldn't want you to be disappointed. Or it was impossible. It's probably why I see things through a child's eyes more than maybe most adults, because I never got discouraged by that. But what it did lead me to is my dad, we had a basement that was just concrete for years, and he said he was going to finish it, and there was going to be 2 bedrooms, and one was going to be mine. Well, I was excited about that because all I'd ever known is a bunk bed and a little brother. And I'd heard, write your goals down, but I didn't have an environment to do that. And I thought, if I ever get my own room, I'm going to put my goals up. So I get my own room. I asked my dad if he'd make me a wall of cork because I wanted to pin my goals up. And in the process, he said, well, I don't know if we can do that, but I'll see what I can do. But I wrote my goals down. I said junior high school, and college to do. But at the top of that goal board was going to be, I will play in the NFL. I wanted to see it every day. It's where I started and I ended my day. My room gets done. The wall, it's not a wall, it's half a wall, but it's big enough. I pin that goal up there. And that's where I come to my first moment of truth in life. I'm looking at the goal. I will play in the NFL. But I'm thinking of all the things that said to me, how hard it is, the odds, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And the more I started thinking about that, I would play in the NFL was just words on a wall. And there was absolutely no energy about that goal. There was massive disappointment, I should say, is the best way I can describe it, because I can go back and think of just how dejected I was. And then the words find a way popped into my head. And I'm telling you, it engaged this one word and this one thing that I always use. It inspired me to take action. It inspired me to do something about my circumstances. And what it did, it changed my thought process. And my mind started thinking about, hey, what can I do to accomplish that goal versus focus on all these things people had said to me. Well, that energy shift was a significant part in my life. So I set off on a journey. I could share stories for hours, from stumbling across Aristotle, what Walter Payton did for me indirectly at that time, and then what he does to me directly later. But had I never been inspired to take action, those words did that for me and helped me live a dream. Now, when I get diagnosed with cancer, a very similar thing happens to me where it's my daughter who challenged me. I get consumed in being diagnosed. I get consumed in being told I have cancer. I'm overwhelmed by that. And it was an experience that I had with my daughter that she challenged me to find a way, because that had been a parenting tool. She had heard me do it all these years when she's struggling or going through something. I'm like, well, so we're going to have to find a way to do it, challenging her to take responsibility for her circumstances and change them. And so that's where it all started. And it has been instrumental in my life still to this day. When those COVID things, I almost wake up every day finding a way because of all the changes. It has really been, but it keeps me engaged in doing something about my circumstances. And that's why when I speak, when I get done, my real hope, if I know if I've done a good job, if I'm talking to people and I hear unsolicited responses about them, about what they know they can do now and how they think about it, how they can apply it, that it's not about me. It's about all of these people who have done so much for me. I'm sharing with them how it helped me and how I applied it, and they can do those things as well. They can apply those as well. And that's what I try to leave people with. Those tools exist in all of us. It's a matter of ultimately you controlling your mind versus your mind controlling you. And all of these things that can help you control your mind, achieve what it is you dream of, circumstances you may struggle with, or something that you may be faced with. And I'm forever grateful for those words. They have been instrumental from that day on, and I really appreciate you asking me that and giving me that opportunity to share that.
Well, I will say to everyone listening in, please take the time to go to Merrill's Instagram, Facebook page, go to his website, and you will find, go to his LinkedIn page, and you will find inspirational, motivational quotes nearly every day from what I saw. And it's a great way to live life. Once again, Merrill, thanks for giving us your time here on the Extra Point on ESPN Denver 1600, and would love to have you come back. And to the audience out there, have a happy Thanksgiving. And once again to Merrill, thank you very much for joining us here on the Extra Point. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great week.
Thank you, John.